I really wanted to touch on two things. In our conversation yesterday, we had a wide-ranging understanding of where you're coming from and what your background is, and I really wanted to focus on 3 points.
Okay.
The first point is just your history of growing up as a young boy and as a young man, as a teenager growing up in the '60s. From the early '60s through the point that you went off to college and things like
Okay.
that. I think it's going to be an interesting story because it's not the typical story of a young African American man growing up. The stereotypical in the hood
Yeah.
kind of a situation, and I think that's going to be a refreshing take.
Yeah.
The other piece of the puzzle that I want to get from you is, and you shared it with me a little bit yesterday, I want to talk to you a little bit about your perception looking back during that tumultuous time in the 1960s, your perspective on that as you see it now as a 72, 71-year-old man. And then I want to bring it full circle because what's going on in our country right now is complex and it's hard and it's sometimes ugly. And I'm anxious to hear your take on what's going on and just your perspective of it all. And I think with that we'll struggle to get this within 30 minutes or so.
Okay.
But those are the three big areas that I want to focus on.
All right. Well, you start the question, and I'll see if I can be as succinct as possible.
Oh, I'm sure you will be. Remember that nobody's going to hear my question necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I may be edited out of the story altogether. There's no camera on me, for example.
Sure.
It's just your story. So to the extent that you can, try to be
As if I'm telling somebody a story about
Exactly.
what I did, but not necessarily pointed at either you or a particular question.
Yeah, just try to put context into
Yeah,
it.
I
If
understand.
I ask you what color the sky is, and you simply reply blue,
That's not going to be, yeah.
right,
Okay,
exactly.
I get you. I understand.
Exactly. So, with that said, the first and most difficult question of the day, if you would, say and spell your name for me.
All right. My name is Keith, Keith. My middle initial is F. I say my middle initial is F because my middle name is Francis, and I didn't like it. So I stopped using it after I got old enough to tell people to leave it alone. My last name is Wheeler, Wheeler.
Great. Keith, let's just start with a little bit of background. Tell me a little bit about where were you born and what was life like as a young boy growing up?
Well, I was born in Harlem Hospital. It's a very famous place now, but in 1948. My mother's name was Verdell. My father's name was John. And I had an older sister. I have an older sister. And we just, from what I remember, we lived on the Lower East Side. It was interesting because on the Lower East Side of New York, there's a street spelled Houston, but it's pronounced Houston. And so that's where we were living, down in they call it the Houston area of New York City. And, just a typical thing. We lived I think we lived in an apartment building, and I didn't get a chance to do too much there because I think I got as far as the 3rd grade. And then my mother and my father separated, and we went to live with my grandmother. So my experiences in New York, they weren't that much, because my grandmother lived 20 miles north of New York City in a town called Spring Valley, New York. People referred to that as the country. Back then they would say, we're going to the country, and it was only 20 miles, but that's where my grandmother was. She had a 10-acre farm. I don't remember if she was doing any farming, but I remember we did have chickens and horses and stuff, but I don't remember if there was any, what you would say, corn or anything like that being grown on the property. But that's where I say that I grew up. When people ask, where did you grow up? I grew up in Spring Valley because I started elementary school there. My sister and I were the first 2 African-American kids to go to this school. It was called Hempstead Elementary School. And the reason that I say that is because where my grandmother lived, she was on the outskirts of the town. So they built a school for the people who lived that far out. And since she was 3 miles outside of the town, we had to go to those schools, or to that school. So it was interesting being the only 2 black kids in a school let's see. I first started there, I think, in 1961 or 62. I think that was the time that I was there. And so, I got to know people just because some people wanted you to be their friend and some people didn't. But it had its drawbacks. There were some people some parents that didn't particularly necessarily like their kids hanging out with you. I remember one kid who was, and again, there's many, many years in separating these things, but one kid was, he invited all of the guys that hung out together to come to his house after school. And so I was one of them, so we all went over there. And sometimes what people don't understand is that you say things and you don't know who's listening, because his mom came home while we were there, and then obviously all of us were leaving after that. But as I was leaving, I heard his mom say, "Don't have him in here when I'm not home." And I thought, okay, I'm learning. These are all the things that I had to learn. I had to learn how to be a black person within a white world, meaning that I understand that you have to be that much more if you're African American or black. I interchange these things. I particularly don't necessarily like African American because I was born in America and I have no ties with Africa at all. But it's because that's a white thing. They're Asian Americans, they're Italian Americans. That's because of where their ancestry came from. All of my ancestry, if you want to say that, they came in Africa because that's how the black people got to the United States. But my father's from Georgia. So anyway, but you had to become more than what other people wanted you to be. They wanted you to be either, I would say, sometimes ignorant, sometimes subservient. But my mom worked for the telephone company. She was one of the few black managers of the phone companies. And she had this thing about speaking properly. So she kind of said that if you don't speak properly, you sometimes will be considered ignorant. So she made a point of making us speak properly, because that's what she had to do as a telephone operator or as a telephone manager in that kind of world. She couldn't say some of the colloquial type things that might be associated with African American speech, because she was not necessarily always talking to African Americans on the phone. And she told me about situations where people would call her names over the phone and then realize that they were talking to an African American. At first, they didn't realize that. They thought they were talking to a white person.
Let me take you back, if you don't mind. I would like to drill down just a little bit on that experience that you said, I am learning how to become a black person in a white world. And that was, that episode of being at your friend's house and overhearing what his mother said to him, don't have him around when I'm not here. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about, if you can transport yourself back, 50 years or 60 years, I should say, as a young boy hearing that, how did that impact you? And drill down into that, what you thought that meant at the time, and then maybe what your perspective is now on that.
Well, at the time, I knew exactly what it meant. It was, she felt, see, you have to understand something, and I guess this is something that a lot of maybe white people need to hear. But whenever someone talks about an African American person, white people consider that to be about the whole group. So if there's a black man that's stealing or a black person that kills or something like that, then the white person, and putting myself in that they're all like that. They all steal, they all do this, they all do that, and so then you become a group. However, if a white person does that, then it's only one person. and you don't condemn the entire group because they committed a crime. Because if you think about it, most of the crimes committed in the United States where multiple people have died were committed by white people. You don't necessarily hear of a black person that's had 50 bodies buried. I mean, it's happened, but you don't find it like that. But you find multiple killers, that type of thing. Anyway, to go back to that, my mom had always told me, that this is, obviously you're not white, so you have to, the only way that you can get to where they are is to take some of the things that they hold dear. One of the things was just being educated, become smart, do some of the things that they hold, because the smarter you are, the more they'll be willing to accept you. So when this kid's mother said that, it really didn't shake me, because I kind of understood it. She thought of me as the average black kid, that I'm going to steal from them. Don't have me in the house when they're not there. Why? Because I'm going to rob their place, or I'm going to, that's the mentality they had. And I mean, I never hung out with that kid anymore because I understood how his family felt. And in fact, the kid's name was Sal. Sal was Italian, but most of the people that kind of really that got to me, I guess, as a friend, were Jewish, because I guess maybe they felt that they were persecuted too. I don't understand necessarily why, but my friends were Alan, and I remember my 16, I had to use someone else's ID for us to go drinking in New York. In New York, they didn't have pictures on your driver's license, so you could use anybody's driver's license that said that you were over 18, because in New York, the drinking age was 18. And my name on my driver's license was David Lederman. And they let me in. I gave them my driver's license, David Lederman. So
I guess they wanted to sell beer.
Yeah. They guess they wanted to. But anyway, to kind of let you know what maybe just to go back a minute, you had to understand that where you were, and and how you were being accepted. My sister and I were accepted in this school because basically they had to. There was, all of a sudden there's 2 black kids in the school, and it was grades. I think it was kindergarten through 6, and at the time I think I was going into 3rd grade, and so my sister was only 2 grades ahead of me. So, but they just had to deal with us, and the part about it was they had a family that was not going to be treated the way that they expected them to be treated. They had a family that was concerned about their kids' education. When there were things going on at the school, my mother, my grandmother, whatever, they showed up, and so you had to get to know some of these people, and they got involved in the community and so forth. And so we just, that's kind of the way that I was raised. Like I told you, a while, and we were talking before, they called my mother Mrs. Wheelerberg because because all the things that the Jewish parents wanted for their kids, she wanted for us. And so in the area that I was growing up, it wasn't if you were going to college, it was which one, because that's the way that was, kind of the way it goes.
Yesterday in our conversation, you said that you had the opportunity every now and then to go back into the Lower East Side where you were born and had some friends and stuff like that, and you drew the distinction between some of the folks who lived in that environment as living day to day, moment to moment, whereas you and your sister were living a plan, that you had your eye on something in the future. Tell me a little bit about that dichotomy and that difference. And maybe it was just a difference of your environment. Yeah. And a difference of your
It was a different of environment, because the parents didn't change. My grandmother didn't change. The thing is and you're saying I didn't necessarily go to the Lower East Side only because I didn't know anybody there. When I left, I was 8 years old. So I didn't have that many friends that I hung around with. All of my friends really were when I was in Rockland County. It was going into Harlem that made that distinction, because that was where my grandmother's sister had an apartment on 137th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem. And that was the place that I didn't feel comfortable with, because that was if put it to you this way, in Rockland County, I was an anomaly because it was more white than black. In Harlem, you were part of the group because there's hardly any white people there. So the thing was you had to be more careful. And I guess it could be also that, you know, black people look at each other saying the same thing, you know. It's dangerous in Harlem. You're going to get robbed in Harlem. You're gonna, you know, and so why do I want to hang out there? Because that's not where I am on a normal basis. I'm in a different place altogether. I leave my bike sitting outside the house. I'm not worried about it being stolen. But in Harlem, at my aunt's house, I was not, at my age, allowed to go downstairs and walk on the street by myself because it wasn't safe. So you see what I'm saying? So, I mean, you know, you have to understand that some of the stuff, some of the tales maybe necessarily, some of the beliefs, after a while, if someone says them enough times, you begin to believe it yourself.
And I suspect that when it comes to, you know, the idea of, you know, the nature versus nurture kind of a thing, you know, if nurture being the environment that you're in is super negative and problematic,
That's right.
how does that leach into your own persona versus you were in this other environment?
Right.
You know, talk to me a little bit about how the environment you think shaped you versus some of the folks that stayed in a more troubled environment, for lack of a better word.
If you're growing up in an area that's relatively poor, and you have to eke out everything that's going on, then you might have a different perspective of how things are being done and so forth. When I say that we were planning, my mom she had a management position. This was not something where she was trying to figure out how to get the food on the table from one day to the next. When you hear about a sports person and saying, you know, they grew up in a single parent household. I was in a single parent household. So it's like, what was the differences? Well, the difference was because you might have been in Alabama and I was in upstate New York. And a single family household in rural Alabama is not the same as the single family household I grew up with in Rockland County, New York. There were certain things that we took for granted that you might not have. You didn't have a car. My first car in college was a 1960 Cadillac that my grandmother gave to me. So, I mean, the whole thing of the environment being here, this environment was, if you wanted to keep up with the Joneses or the Jewish people or whatever, then you had to live up in this type of situation. Whereas if I was in Alabama or Mississippi or one of those states, the bar wasn't this high. And sometimes that was one of the things that, you know, I guess, I don't know if I would say prided myself, but it would bother me a little bit because I tried to tell people, and I think I told this to my kids too, is that sometimes people try to lower the bar for you. Don't let them do it. You know,
discrimination of low expectations.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, if I'm trying to become here to wherever that point is, and someone says, "Oh, that's okay. We'll let you do that." Don't do that. That's lowering the bar to accommodate me. Leave it here. Let me go up to it. It's a different mindset when you're trying to think about things like that. Living in Rockland County gave me that because I saw people who were constantly driving, trying to get something done. They were not, at least where my grandmother was in the schools that I was in. I might have been the only black kid in this particular school, but in the elementary school. But then later on, they built a junior high school to accommodate all the families that were now moving into that area. And I was a student council president. I didn't have to, you know, I didn't have that type of thing. But when I got out of junior high school, the only senior high school was in downtown. And that's where everybody went to school. So I got a chance to meet all the black kids that I hadn't met before and all that other stuff. And I had to graduate from that high school. So again, that's how everybody got back together again. But
how was that different? And so you once you got to high school, now you're dealing with other kids who are black, and maybe have a different mentality, had a different background and environment that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
How did you manage that, and how did you perceive that at the time as a student, as an athlete? As you said, you played football and track and I think something else.
Wrestling.
And wrestling.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
walk me through your high school experience and how that was another paradigm shift for you, right?
Right.
Tell
right.
me about that.
There was, well, first of all, I was, I don't know if I want to say this, but I wasn't accepted by a lot of the black kids there. They had names for you. You know, like I think I mentioned to you before, Oreo, Uncle Tom, that kind of stuff. Why? Because you didn't think like they did. To them, you thought like a white person, which to me wasn't a bad thing. It just meant that I had other goals in my mind, and you didn't. But the thing was you just had to get along. So sometimes you got along by doing the wrong thing. You know, you're allowed to walk off campus during lunchtime. And if you go down to this local kind of store, I think it was called Shoppers Paradise, but it was like a little mall, and all of your friends are stealing candy. It's like, what are you doing? You know, so they come back to the school from lunch and they've got candy bars in their hand. You know, do you want one? Where'd you get it? Well, we got it from, okay, fine. But that's not what, this was what they saw. They had to steal the candy because that's the only way they were going to get it. I didn't have to steal the candy because my mom would have bought it for me. It was not an issue like that. But you know, just the fact that we didn't hang out all the time, or I didn't with that group. But most of the people that I hung out with were the white kids on the team because they knew me from where I had just come from. I had to learn James Jr. and all the other black kids that were there that were there in the high school. But I had to learn who they were. I didn't necessarily hang out with them because, understand, when they left school, they walked home. When I left school, I had to ride a bus. Remember, I'm 3 miles outside of town. So the only high school, I had to ride a bus to get there. So it's two different worlds. Completely two different worlds.
Tell me a little bit about.
Hold for 1 sec.
Did I move something?
No, not at all. I just wanted to check something.
Making you guys nervous?
No.
I'm kidding, man. Gosh. Come on.
This is fascinating to me.
But do you understand what the differences were in high school? I mean, obviously in sports was a completely different thing. But as things go, you still had those images that people were not going to get rid of. My sister was very smart, she's the smart one of the family, but I was the jock. I didn't do too much of anything. My principal told me that he didn't expect me to graduate from high school. That's because I didn't take it seriously, but I did. It's not as seriously as he thought I should have. So that's okay.
You said that you had a job at a golf course. That you were limited as to what you were allowed to do.
Lord.
Tell me about that experience.
I hated that job. Well, in order to try to build some form of, not confidence, but responsibility, my mother made us work. My sister did whatever she was doing, but as far as a young black man, the only jobs that were available, and this was working as a caddy at the local golf course. Now, when I say working as a caddy, it's not as impressive or whatever what it is today. You had to get there by dawn, 6 o'clock in the morning, and because I was a little kid, and these were grown men that were actually doing this job, men that were in their 20s and 30s, that were able to carry 2 bags and walk around this golf course. And then because I was there, they might give me a single every once in a while, carrying 2 bags around 18 holes was not something that I really wanted to do, but I had to because it was $10 a bag for 18 holes. So you went home with $20 after working all day long. So, the fact that I hated it was because I didn't want to work using my muscles. I wanted to work using my mind because that was so much easier. But to get up and to get over there to the golf course and somebody would drive me over. My grandmother worked in the ladies' coat room or check room, and that was because that was the job that she could get. So when the ladies would come in to have their shoes, they would turn their shoes in, and she'd have to shine them and get them all ready. It's basically a subservient job, but that's what she had to do. I found out later on that my grandmother also was a coat check woman at the Renaissance Ballroom, which was in Harlem, which was a very famous place later on. But that's what she did. So I would go up there when she would go to work, and then I would try to make money at it. Sometimes I would carry 2 bags and make $20, and sometimes I would only make $10. But I was there all day doing that, and I hated it because I wanted to do something that was, that wasn't as manual. I would have never survived as a slave. They'd have killed me in the field because I couldn't have done that. I could not have survived in that kind of situation. But the golf course was there. It was a way of making money, and I guess it gave me a insight into what was available. Because after I was able to find my own kind of work or do other things, I never went back. A friend of my grandfather's, a lawyer, had a house, and he had a swimming pool. Not too many people had swimming pools in upstate New York, so he had a swimming pool. And he wanted somebody to clean it on a regular basis, so I would go clean his swimming pool on a Saturday morning. The hardest part about the swimming pool cleaning was that it was cold early Saturday morning, but I cleaned it But you see, that was something that was not only comfortable doing it, but it wasn't demeaning to me. Have you ever shagged? Do you know what shagging is? Okay. You're standing over there maybe about 100 yards, maybe a little bit more, hitting golf balls. I'm picking them up. That's called shagging. If you go to most driving ranges today, what do they have doing that? A machine. So they didn't have those back in the 60s. So then after the person would get their golf balls and they would shoot them over here, over there, whatever, and you had to run over there and pick it up, put it in the bag, run over here, and then guess what? You take it back to them and you do it all over again. Come on, really? Is that the thing you want to do all day long for $5 and $10? No. But that's what the golf course was to me. It was just one of the worst experiences I've ever had was just doing that. It was not something that I felt. If you had asked me when I came home, how was your day? It would have been, oh God, just normal. It's the same things. I mean, I had to shag or I had to carry this, and sometimes you'd have 2 bags and then you'd have 2 people that one went this way, one went that way. And then you'd have to run over to get this person's club and run back over. Today you have a cart that does that. So just imagine, it was just terrible.
Did you ever see the movie Hidden Figures?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with it?
Mm-hmm.
Some of what you're talking about to me kind of parallels the basic storyline behind this movie. The story of these really smart women who were fantastic at mathematics, which I started thinking about yesterday when you told me about your degree in math.
Mm-hmm.
That they were the ones who were the computers in the early space program to help the astronauts and the engineers figure out what to do, but they were hidden. They were in the background. They were just doing this.
Do you know why they were hidden?
No.
Would you, back in the 60s, admit to the fact that you got your information from a black person? No. You wouldn't do that. They wouldn't give the people the credit for doing that. It's like, here are women that knew how to do some of this stuff because they went to school or whatever. And if you remember the movie, the one woman had to get a judge to say that she could take this particular course so she could get. Okay, so obviously you weren't supposed to be here. You're not that smart. What are you doing? And so here's this woman that said, I know how to do all this stuff. And they didn't want to accept it. That's why they were hidden. It's the same, it's like, okay, how'd you get the answer? I got the answer. What do you care how I got it? You look very smart. You don't know that the person sitting behind you gave it to you. It was a matter of pride. White people didn't want to say that they had gotten any help from somebody that, or from something that they thought was beneath them. Remember, all of the struggles of the 60s and all that was to prove that we were capable of becoming citizens in a world that said, no, you're just an animal, and that's all you're ever going to be. And it's still the same today.
Is it? Do you see no real progress or change from your perspective? Is it just as difficult as it was 40 or 50 years ago? You think?
It's the same to me because some of the people's thinking hasn't changed. And it's not necessarily the white people's thinking that hasn't changed. Sometimes it's the black people's thinking that hasn't changed. For me, one of the things that bothers me the most is that song. You know, We Shall Overcome. I'm tired of it because it was a gospel song, and it was a song that was being sung in the fields when you were whatever. You know, we shall overcome someday. You shouldn't have to do that. You know, you're born in the United States, and so it should be something that is normal to you. But the fact that being, I guess, maybe nonviolent and all that, all those things that happened were happening when I was in high school and college. None of those things happened necessarily when I was outside of that, unless you talk about maybe Rodney King or something like that. But it just, you know, like 40 acres and a mule. Why do you still want that? Why do you want reparations? If you want reparations, that means you want something for nothing. You want a handout. You don't need that. All I want you to do is just accept me as an equal. Accept me as an equal. Don't necessarily treat me as someone that always needs something from you. That's a child. If you treat somebody as an equal, then it's like, okay, well, you have the right to go to college, you have the right to earn this, you have the right to do that, you have the right to vote, you have the right to do this, but you don't make things difficult. You don't say, well, no, you don't have the right to do that because, you know, you're black and you can't do that right now. Okay, so then what do I have to do to be able to do that? Well, you have to get an education. Okay, I got one. Now what? Oh, well, you know, you still have to be able to, now what do I have to do to get that? Okay, well, you got that. Stop and lowering the bar. I think of, and sometimes I go off of these things, but I think of Charles Barkley. And I think of Charles Barkley and the things that he says when he's on television as an anchor for whatever. And Charles Barkley says some really weird things. But if he was a white person, he'd gotten fired. If he was on a local regular news station or whatever, he'd gotten fired. But because he's black and they're making fun of him, they're keeping him on there, and he becomes comic relief. These are the things where I'm saying, the sportscasters. You have a white sportscaster, two white sportscasters on ESPN. One is in a suit and a white shirt, and one is in a suit and a different color shirt with a tie, and then you have the black guy that's there for color, and there's an orange or red suits, or he's got these stripes on him and stuff like that. It's like, why? Because you're the clown on the set, buddy. If you were serious, you would say, I'm going to... Typical story, just for this. I'm working in Los Angeles as I was a hardware specialist. Somehow I'd gotten this job and I'd worked up to it. And they had Casual Fridays. And you guys have heard of Casual Fridays, I'm sure. I went to my boss and I said, you know, Casual Friday, how come you don't come in? And he goes, oh, I forgot. And I asked him again. I said, oh, I forgot. And then I realized he didn't forget. He was a manager. He didn't do that. That was not, Casual Fridays to them was the same thing they wore every single day. So then I started that. I started wearing a shirt and tie every single day coming to work. I had people saying to me, don't you ever? I go, nope, this is my casual. I'm casual just the way I am. And then being on an elevator in the 62-story building in downtown Los Angeles, Casual Friday, I'm standing there with managers, and elevator opens up, and there's this woman wearing a T-shirt. And in a bank in downtown Los Angeles on a Friday, this woman is wearing a shirt that says, shit happens, because it's Casual Friday. She's wearing a T-shirt that says, shit happens. And then you hear people say, that's why I don't do anything on casual Fridays. Do you see? And this was a black woman. Sorry, but she just didn't get it. And so how many times do you have to tell people, this is what you've got to do. You've got to stop, get out of that situation and give yourself a plan or something to get you out of that. Stop accepting everything that everybody gives to you. I didn't make $40 million playing football, but I could have. If God had seen it right, he'd have given me, I have a half brother. I have a half brother because my father married. You know how tall my half brother is? 6'8". And he doesn't like sports. And he always likes to stand next to me so he can look down at me, and I always stand back so that the angle, so the angle was a little bit different, so I didn't like looking up. But every once in a while I would say, Lord, if you'd given me that, I'd have made you proud. 6'8", didn't play a lick of sports. I was 5'6", 7 on a good day. But anyway, I know I've got a little bit off of what you were saying, but have to understand that these stories lead to, there's tons of things. So what is your next thing? I think you said you wanted to get to how I feel about what's going on today.
Yeah, I would love
to
to
bring
hear
it full
your
circle.
Take on your take from your perspective of what's going on today as issues like Black Lives Matter are prevalent. Black Lives Matter, the organization. Black Lives Matters, the idea, which may be different from each other. Just your whole take on what's going on in terms of, race relations in America from your perspective and your background.
Okay. Obviously, I believe in Black Lives Matter. I believe that, as I was saying to you before, everybody should be treated equally. And if they were treated equally, then you wouldn't probably have some of this, the things that go on. But again, you have to change that mentality, because you're so used to, you're coming from an area, or I should say maybe a background where you had to take things to get it, or everything wasn't always there, or you had to struggle to get food, or you had to struggle to do this. And my biggest thing about this is, if a policeman says something to you, or he's coming to you to do something to you, like arrest you or ask you questions, don't run. If you're going to run, they're going to think you're guilty about doing something. Don't become, I don't know what the word belligerent is, but treat them the way you would like to be treated. Now, I've been stopped by a policeman here in Orlando. At the time, I had a car. The car that I had was a black Mercedes. And the policeman pulled me over. I stopped, I made a right turn and got ready to turn into the left lane, and he was behind me and he pulled me over. He stopped me because my light over my license plate was out. Do you hear me? The license plate light was out. So, do you know why I pulled you over? No. Your license plate light is out. Really? Okay, so I got out and I walked over there. The light was on, but it was very dim. Like maybe the bulb needed to be replaced or something. But he pulled me over because I don't care what anybody says. You have a driver's license and they ask you for license and registration. But realistically, they have a computer system that knows exactly who's driving that car and exactly whether that car has been registered or not. So he sees black man, Mercedes, I'm going to pull him over. Didn't have anything, In Los Angeles, I got pulled over. Policeman pulled me over because I was talking on the phone. Okay, now I understand that's recent, but I was talking on the phone. So he pulls me over, and when he stopped me, he walked up to the side of the car, and I was this way. And he says, can I see your license and registration? He said, well, first of all, you know what you were doing. You see your license and registration? I said, okay. My license is in my back pocket. The registration is in the glove compartment. I want you to know I'm going to go into the glove compartment to get you the registration, but there is no gun in there. Okay? If I had done this immediately, he might have said, what are you doing? Again, Los Angeles, because I lived in Los Angeles for a long time. I made I made a left turn into a gas station. Policeman pulls over, pulls me up, and he says, do you know what you did wrong? I said, nope. I said, I made a left turn. And I said, I understand that when you cross the double yellow line, you can pull into a driveway. I pulled into this gas station. He said the difference was, he said, it was a diamond, and there's double left lines, yellow lines on both sides. So in essence, you've crossed two double yellow lines. He says, but I'm going to let you go because you know the law. Do you see what I'm talking about? This man he could have given me a ticket then, but he said, I'm going to let you go because you know the law. So what I'm telling you is even the policemen respect you if you let them know that I'm not the average person that you're expecting to find wherever you're going to be, behind the wheel or whatever. But I did have a policeman pull me over, and he stopped me, and I knew he wanted the registration. So I did this before he got to the car. And when he got to the car, he says, what were you doing? I said, I was getting your registration. He says, never do that. He says, don't ever do that until I get to the car, because I thought you were going for a gun. Again, learn from your mistakes. So I knew that that was not the thing to do. I've had run-ins from policemen who thought I was drinking. I did the little walk thing on the sidewalk, and then he took me to the station because he wanted to give me the breathalyzer test. So I did the breathalyzer test. In California at the time it was 0.08, and my breath test came in at 0.07. So I said, so I know I did this thing on the sidewalk, okay, and this says that I haven't been drinking, I'm at that limit. Why are you arresting me? Because in my opinion, you were driving under the influence. I go, well, if it's in your opinion, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't change your opinion. But I did have a lawyer. The lawyer went to the judge. The judge says no crime has been committed, and they threw it out of court. But you see what I'm saying? All this stuff that when I've had run-ins with policemen, I've not tried to challenge their authority, because as a police officer, they do have the right to ask you for your license and to give you your identification. Give it to them. I mean, so what? What's it going to do? But if you don't run, when people, like the guy that in Atlanta, the policeman, they had stopped him. He was asleep in a a drive-through, like a McDonald's, asleep in the car, and they woke him up, and they're outside talking to him. And the policeman says, well, sir, you've been drinking, so because of that, and when he spun him around to put the handcuffs on him, the guy ran away, and he grabbed the taser unit, and they wound up shooting him in the back. Now, my question to you is, as a police officer, here's the man's car. You've got his keys. You know the address because of the license plate. What are you going to chase him for? He's going to come home eventually. Why do you put yourself? Because I'm a policeman. So I have the right to go get you. And you're running away from me. Stop, whatever N-word you want to use. And he shoots him. Why did you have to shoot this man? It's like, he'll be back. It's just, if he wants to run, let him run. We'll find him eventually because we'll go sit outside his house. He has no place else to go except to come back here. And when he comes back, you go, okay, well, listen, you ran. Now we're still going to get you because you ran away. My whole thing with George, what was his name? I can't say. Floyd, thank you. George Floyd. George Floyd was standing on the sidewalk, if you look at the video, in handcuffs. He's talking to the policeman. Then they tried to put him in the back of the car. It was when he was struggling for them to put him in the back of the car. My point is, if you're in handcuffs, why struggle? Just get in the car. If you know that you're outnumbered and the people are going to, don't allow yourself to be put in a situation that now you're in trouble for. And again, I keep telling you that, but I was teaching in Los Angeles, and I was with a friend he was driving, and policemen pulled him over, and they found a billy club in the back seat of his car. And it's illegal. It was a felony or whatever. So I'm standing there on the side, and they're asking for my ID and stuff like this. And I was telling him, I was trying to be belligerent. I was trying to get out of myself feeling of, being nice all the time. So I'm saying, and this is a white guy saying, don't do this. You don't have to give him your name. You don't have to do this. So the policeman says, can I see your driver's license? And I gave it to him. He comes back and he says, how much money do you have on you? And I said, about $25. And he says, okay. He says, we just ran your license and found out that you've got a parking ticket that has gone to warrant. He said, now you can either get in your friend's car and follow us around to the police station and pay that ticket, or I can put you in the back of my car. And he looked at me and said, and there's nothing I'd rather do than put you in the back of my car. I said, I know you would, sir. I will get in his car and I will follow you to this police station. Because the thing is that I knew what was going to happen if I had to get into the back. I'm glad that I had $25 in the ticket was $19. But if I didn't have $19 in my car, he'd have arrested me and put me in the back seat. And you see, the thing is if you learn from those types of things, every time I see a police officer, I thank him for his service, but I know that he doesn't trust me. That's just the way he is. That's just the way he's been taught. So, the thing is, I don't want them to defund the police department. All I want them to do is train them. Train them that when they see a black man, they don't think trouble all the time. They think human, deal with it. If you treat a dog that way, after a while, even though you're feeding the dog, he's going to bite you. If you keep beating on a dog, then they're going to be afraid to come to you. And if the dog could talk to other dogs, they'll all tell you, don't go to that person because he's mean. So if you just say, listen, just understand something. Everybody's not going to have a good day. You're not going to have a good day, officer. Just treat everybody the same and you'll be fine.
Always comes back to the simple golden rule.
Do unto others? No.
No?
It's not necessarily do unto others. It's treat others. And do unto others, okay, that's but I'm saying you have to have respect of others before you can do unto them. If you're someone that I have no respect for, then I don't care. I have no respect for you. There's nothing you can do to tell me that to make me change my mind about you because you don't mean anything to me. But if I treat you as someone with respect, then I will see that, you have bad days, I have bad days. I have a job to do. If you understand that I have a job to do, if you want to arrest me, sir, arrest me, because I know that I have the law behind me and I can get. I'm not going to go out and shoot anybody. I'm not going to rob a store. And everybody that's black doesn't do that. Then we're not all criminals. So when you think of that, when I see a white person, every white person is not smarter than I am. Every white person isn't somebody that I have to get down on one knee and do the sign of the cross and everything. But what a white person does have, they have my respect. There's just a person, just like me. I'm not going to call you outside of your name, and if you call me outside of mine, then my thing is I won't have anything to do with you. I have that privilege because I'm smart enough to know that if I don't want to be bothered by you, I just walk away. It's like people who, when you have all the divorces and stuff like that, you can always walk. You don't have to be violent. You don't have to you just walk. You say, okay, I'll see you. I'm going to go away now. I'm not going to be bothered with you. Because it's just too easy to just say, if you want to have violence, it's called temporary insanity, whatever you want to, everybody goes insane at one time or another. Poor OJ, But the thing about him, he got freed. He got freed on a technicality. They said that he didn't kill his wife, Nicole. Okay. But the father still wants to get money from him because he wanted to go through a civil suit. The man was found not guilty of murder, but now he still says that he killed her. So it's all the different things that happen. Rodney King and all that. Rodney King kept trying to get up. Here's 6 policemen with billy clubs saying, sit down, lay down. And he still wanted to get up. Why? Because he thought he could. And then, there's riots and things. And if you want to go to looting, I've been in places where I've seen the looting and stuff. I know you keep looking at your watch, but, looting to me is just stupid because, again, it's like, I was working at a television station and we had a cameraman going down the street catching people looting, and there was a guy actually pushing a piano down the street in Los Angeles. This was during the Rodney King stuff. Pushing a piano, and then looked at the guy with the camera and smiled as he's doing it. And, dummy, what are you? That's the other thing, I guess. It's like, there's no price for being stupid. You can be stupid if you want to, but the thing is that if everybody used their mind for what it was given to you for, then you wouldn't have half of the problems you have now. So that's me.